It is often recommended to strategize the latter years of an SMSF upon the fund's establishment, and that includes estate planning. Matthew Burgess from View Legal is with me to look at this issue today. Welcome, Matthew.
G'day, Darren. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Let's get into it. Look, what estate planning strategies should be considered when trustees actually set up an SMSF?
Yeah, great question, Darren. I think from our perspective, and I know a lot of specialists in this area have a very similar attitude, the mantra of beginning with the end in mind is sort of probably the best one to follow with. And I know that applies to a lot of things in life, but particularly in relation to superannuation, you really want to make sure ideally you've got an exit plan from the very get-go. A couple of the points, though, that I'd flag on that, that sounds relatively simple in theory. In practice, it's a lot more difficult to deliver on that particular mantra, particularly in the context of, I think, often people will have thought about what an exit might look like in terms of a death event, but then they won't necessarily have then created a parallel solution in relation to an incapacity event. And in some respects, you'd actually say that incapacity is possibly an even more important situation to get right. On death, a lot of people have the attitude, well, I'm not around anymore. It's not my problem from there on. The reality is, though, with an incapacity event, you could have a situation where the member is alive for many, many years, still part of the SMSF. And if their wishes have not been crafted from the very get-go in terms of exactly what they want to have during that period, then there's all manner of problems that can arise.
Yeah, really good point there, Matthew. So if we start at the beginning, obviously people's circumstances change over time. How often should these plans be reviewed?
Yeah, another really important point, isn't it? Because from a specialist advisor perspective, you would generally say that at a minimum, you'd be reviewing it every 12 months. Now, that I should sound like a lawyer for a moment when I give that comment, though. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily looking to go and change things every 12 months. It's more that we're building a heuristic, we're building a rule of thumb that we are actually reviewing this stuff on a regular basis. And ideally, you pick something that is going to be a bit of a memory hook and that you're probably looking at things anyway. So whether it's, on the date that the audit report's issued each year or when you're due to do your tax return, whatever it might be, ideally, there should be a run through of exactly what is going to happen in both that incapacity event that we focused on in that initial question, but then also in relation to a death event. And then overlaying that almost on a checklist style basis, overlaying any changes that might have happened on two levels. First level, and probably the obvious and most easiest one, is have there been any changes in the factual matrix of the individual members, so in terms of their personal circumstances? And then on top of that, what changes have taken place in the wider legislative landscape and all cases that have come through. And I think, as we sit here in mid-2023, we've just seen an absolutely overwhelming amount of changes in this space, whether it be fast death tax or the $3 million cap or, the changes to the number of members that a fund can have. All of these things, I think, have a direct impact on the types of issues that you're talking about.
Absolutely. Now, we started talking about what to consider at the establishment of a fund, but how different are the strategies applicable for SMSF members when their fund has been in existence for a period of time?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Because in theory, if we've done the establishment properly and we've begun with the end in mind, we've ticked that box, and then we've been reviewing it on that periodic basis, probably every year or indeed more regularly if the factual matrix requires that, then in theory, it shouldn't matter that we're partway through the life cycle of the fund. In theory, everything should always be up to date. In practice, radically different, and it's probably why almost all specialist advisors, at least that we speak with in this space, are out of control busy, not particularly looking for more work and not seeing any signs that the work's going to taper off anytime soon. Why is that? Well, I think the answer is that, while the textbooks will tell us that we should be looking at it from the get-go and looking at it very regularly, the reality is that just does not happen. And so what you're left with is either underlying trust instruments that have probably, got heritage issues that were never really addressed at the time, and then those issues build up. And then on top of that, you've got factual matrices that have just expanded and evolved and changed so radically that by the time you then overlay the legislative and case law changes, you've actually potentially got an enormous problem that, will require material investment to actually get it fixed up.
Okay, and then on a more general basis, what are some of the key concepts advisors need to consider to ensure, say, death benefit payments actually go to the right people?
Right. And you did warn me. You said that there'll be at least one really tricky question. I think you've saved that to last, haven't you? That is almost an entire session in itself, the answer to that question. And it goes to the heart, really, of what we're going to be talking about. And quick plug for the upcoming events. It's going to be the centerpiece of our session anyway, when we go through the topic as part of the upcoming roadshow. I would say, and maybe this is at too macro a level to be valuable, but I would say that, the starting point in a lot of these places is to actually read the baseline documentation. So we've got that catchphrase that a lot of people use in any trust-related area, particularly in relation to SMSFs, to read the deed. In saying that, though, I want to be a real lawyer about that and call out the question being, well, how do we each define the deed? Because it's all very easy saying, well, the trust deed is the physical document sitting in front of us. But for SMSF specialists, what we should be acutely aware of is that is a necessary starting point, but never sufficient. What do I mean by that? Well, as a starting point, if there have been deeds of variation, has someone sat down and actually looked at each of those variations and made sure that each of them was valid at the time it was done in accordance with the pre-existing deed? Lost count of the number of situations where we've seen that become a problem. Further, making sure that we have a very holistic approach in terms of how we define the trust deed. So not only does it include the current instrument, not only does it include every variation, not only does it include the original instrument, but also includes related documentation, for example, binding nominations, enduring powers of attorney, anything else that might impact on the interpretation of the core provisions, I would argue should fall under the heading of what is the trust deed.
Okay, well, thanks very much for those insights, Matthew.
Great to connect today, Darren. Thank you.
As Matthew just said while he was answering the last question, he will be covering these issues in more detail at the SMSF Professionals Day 2023, co-hosted by Self-Managed Super and Accurium. This year's event is returning to a 3-city roadshow, which will be kicking off in Brisbane on the 25th of May and concluding in Sydney on the 8th of June. There will also be an online component. To find out more about the event and register, please reference the details you can see on your screen now. Look, thanks again, Matthew, and I look forward to your session at the SMSF Professionals Day.
Counting down the sleeps, Darren. Speak soon.